Elections are costing more and more in America. Big campaign bucks is playing a decisive role in our politics. How damaging is it, and where are we heading? I discussed with Dr. Dan McMillan from Save Democracy in America. Dan McMillan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Steve. Good to be with you.
Dan, with the consequential midterms upon us, I'd like to ask you about gerrymandering, not something you hear about every day. So first, if you could just tell us exactly what it is and where the line between gerrymandering and redistricting lies.
Well, gerrymandering is basically politicians get into office and then they get to choose the voters they need to stay in office rather than the voters choosing them. And gerrymandering is just the process of every 10 years after the census, we redraw all the electoral districts for state legislatures and for the House of Representatives, because every district is supposed to have the same number of people so that you get the one person, one vote principle. The problem, however, is that where's the line between legitimate redistricting and partisan gerrymandering for partisan advantage? I don't know that anyone's found that, other than to say that we crossed it quite a long time ago. Both parties have done it always to some degree, and now, according to the Cook report, there are only, out of the 435 districts in the House, there are only 33 that are considered genuine toss-ups, and another 22 that are considered remotely competitive, which means that really you're talking about 90% of the incumbents are basically in safe districts, in safe seats.
Dan, there's another topic I want to discuss with you. When these elected officials actually do make their way to the Capitol in Washington, they say money is the root of all evils. When it comes to money in politics, your organization, Save Democracy in America, really tries to highlight this fact. What should the American people be aware of?
Well, what I think is that, money has played a decisive role in our politics. The federal elections of 2020, that is White House and Congress, individuals and pressure groups, corporations spent $14.5 billion. That was in constant dollars more than twice the cost of the 2016 elections. It's now to the point where members of Congress typically spend 30 hours a week on the phone raising money for the next election rather than doing their jobs. And what this means, it's basically destroyed, it's made a complete mockery of the principle of government by the people in our country. I mean, the damage, you could already see the damage in the 1980s, but it's gotten to a point now, among other things, you can't bring up in a campaign and you can't bring up in office any policy idea that would be unattractive. Forget even something that would anger donors. Even something that's unappealing to donors is a bad idea, because you're not a serious candidate. The media won't take you seriously if already before the primary you haven't raised money up to a very high bar, like say for a House race, at least $500,000. And consequently, more and more, any solution to the country's problems is automatically off the table. To take, for example, just healthcare, we pay more than twice as much per person in this country as people pay, as other countries pay for health care, like France or Canada or whatever. Yet we have a lower life expectancy, and 1 American in 10 has no insurance. Part of the problem is drug manufacturers who throw tons of money at Congress see to it that we're not allowed in this country to regulate drug prices the way every other country does, so Americans pay twice as much for medicine as other people and often go bankrupt trying to pay for medications they need. Health insurance companies are always looking for excuses to deny coverage and are micromanaging doctors.
So it sounds like, this is actually a bipartisan issue in the sense that regardless of which party you belong to, you essentially enter this apparatus in Washington once you're elected.
That's exactly right. It is completely a bipartisan problem. And also, I want to say that the donors who give the money, the politicians who take the money, Steve, these are not evil people. These are patriotic Americans, just like you and I and everyone in our audience. They're doing what they have to do. If you're a wealthy Republican and you don't lay a lot of cash on the Republican Party, you know that Democratic donors will control our government. If you're a wealthy Democrat, you're in the same boat. If you're a politician, fundraising is just part of the job. If you don't have stomach for big ticket fundraising, don't go into politics. So the problem is not the people in our politics. The problem is just the perverted incentives of a money-driven system. And it's not something that any of us chose. It's just the Supreme Court made a bad decision in 1976. A few other things happened in the way that politics is done. The money has a dynamic of its own. And I can't say it strongly enough. Our fellow Americans are not the enemy. The money and only the money is our enemy. And it's the enemy of us all.
Dan McMillan, Save Democracy in America. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you very much.
The Biden administration announced that it is taking steps to address teacher shortages. Low wages, months of remote learning, and resulting student mental health troubles, along with curriculum controversies, have left school districts throughout the country without enough teachers. The administration is now collaborating with hiring firms to fill these teaching vacancies. Careers in teaching and education are being encouraged by the initiative. The announcement listed online platforms that will host virtual events and hiring fairs to open avenues into teaching. The administration also plans salary increases for teachers and improved working conditions. According to the announcements, $130 billion in President Biden's American Rescue Plan is directed to the nation's K-12 schools. As the deadly opioid drug called fentanyl sweeps the country. Here to discuss, we're happy to have retired DEA agent Derek Maltz. Derek Maltz, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Thank you for having me on this important topic here.
Derek, today is International Overdose Awareness Day. As a retired DEA agent being on the front lines, what is the most pressing matter right now from your perspective?
Well, from my perspective, we have a chemical weapon attack on American kids, and we have a lack of engagement from the White House, and the sense of urgency just doesn't exist. I mean, right now, families around the country are waking up and finding their loved ones dead in the bedrooms, sometimes from one pill that they've ordered on social media. But the problem is this is not your typical drug crisis. This is a mass poisoning of American citizens. And we've never seen this in the history of the country. Unfortunately, the current administration is kind of using old talking points on the opioid addiction crisis, which we also have, by the way. But this is way more severe, and we need to operate with a sense of urgency. And right now, it's not happening.
Derek, I don't think this is really political for you. I personally met you at a small-scale event with absolutely no media about over a year ago, and it was just the families of loved ones who lost them to fentanyl. This is personal for you. Why?
Well, look, when you listen to the stories of these poor families that had beautiful kids, that had bright futures, that made one mistake, and you know, I have a saying that I've been using that kids should learn from mistakes, not die from mistakes. And I also have another saying, and I'm very serious about this. This is one issue that's not a red or a blue issue. It's a red, white, and blue issue. And speaking of the families, last year we had the rally outside of the Chinese embassy in August. This year in September 17th, we have a big rally that's scheduled starting out on the lawn, and then we're going to walk over to the White House, and there'll be hundreds and hundreds of families from around the country here to spread awareness, because they just don't understand why this issue is being ignored. It's like something we can't even talk about. We can't understand it. Who in America wants to see a 13-year-old dead from poison coming from labs in Mexico or China? It's insanity. And we don't address it. We're not addressing it. There's no public service announcements. Where's all the celebrities and influencers out there? They don't want to talk about it because they don't understand it. They think it's your typical drug crisis. This is a poisoning, and the Communist Party of China is also behind it.
Derek, you often mention the Chinese Communist Party's culpability on this epidemic. It can appear abstract in a way, but you say it needs to be confronted.
Well, let me tell you this. I agree with you. It seems like really out there, And let me explain this to you. I was fortunate. I ran the Special Operations Division for about 10 years. 30 agencies, 3 countries, NYPD, Intel Community, DOD. I was fortunate to be in the middle of these operations to get the intelligence on a daily basis. When we saw in 2008, 2009 timeframe, synthetic drugs coming into America from Wuhan-style labs that were impacting our American citizens, at first it was synthetic drugs like synthetic cannabinoids, cathinones, and they were like advertised as K2 spice, synthetic marijuana, bath salts. And what was happening is the kids were smoking this stuff, using this stuff, and they were going to the emergency room. There was poison control center calls. None of the parents knew about it. I didn't even know about it. I was running the largest law enforcement center going after drug traffickers. I didn't even know about it. So what happened was, after we put some significant pressure on the Chinese lab operators, they then shifted, and then we started seeing fentanyl on the streets of America. Around 2012, we started seeing mass amounts of deaths starting in America from fentanyl. Again, I had no idea as the head of this operation that fentanyl was all over these street drugs. Then we started seeing the convergence of the Mexican cartels with the Chinese lab operators, and then the Dominican traffickers pushing this stuff on the streets. And then all of a sudden, the deaths went through the roof. In talking to many experts around the world regarding the Communist Party's, unrestricted warfare, they're looking to destabilize their adversary. What better way than to use the Mexican cartels as their proxies to destroy our families, our communities, and our kids? It's a brilliant plan on behalf of the Communist Party of China to accomplish their goal, to destroy Americans' power and world influence.
Retired DEA agent Derek Maltz, thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve.
Senator Joni Ernst named China as America's #1 adversary during a speech on the direction of the Republican Party last week. Ernst said that the Chinese communist regime is expanding its sphere of influence globally by providing loans to many countries, including Panama.
If this key shipping lane was handed over to our #1 adversary, I hate to even imagine the long-term economic and security impacts that would have on our American farmers, our businesses, and our families.
She said that if China were to take over Taiwan, the U.S. would lose our top producer of chips and semiconductors.
So if China were to invade and take Taiwan, then again, you can say goodbye to that new iPhone 25 or, whatever the latest version would be, or the basic household appliances and electronics.
The senator pointed out that the rare earth minerals used to make phones and electric cars were sourced from slave labor in communist China. She's also calling for the U.S. to go back to energy independence. And she said America must lead through a position of strength. The cost of busing illegal immigrants from Texas to D.C. and New York City has been released. The Texas Division of Emergency Management told the El Paso Times that the agency has paid over $12 million transporting illegal immigrants. The busts were processed and released by the federal government into Texas border communities. The cost equates to about $1,300 per person. Over 9,000 illegal immigrants have been bused from the border state to D.C. and New York. This is part of Governor Abbott's initiative to bring attention to what he calls the Biden administration's open border policies.